1,000 hunting accidents are reported in the United States each year. Fewer than 10% of them are fatal. But when one hunter's death seemed suspicious, the FBI was called in to investigate. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Agents would have to determine if their suspect was a grieving father figure or a man who murdered a friend in cold blood.
It was the fall of 1983. 4 men set out into the forests of Virginia for a deer hunt. David Fiser, Bobby Mulligan, Fiser's 16-year-old stepson, and an 18-year-old named David Wilkie. Wilkie was young, barely out of boyhood. He had come to look at Fiser as a father figure, the kind of older man who takes a kid under his wing and shows him the world. Wilkie trusted him completely. That trust would cost him his life. At some point during the hunt, a shot rang out through the trees. When the smoke cleared, David Wilkie lay dead, a bullet from Mulligan's shotgun tearing through him. Mulligan told the first officer on scene that he had slipped on dry leaves, that his finger caught the trigger, that it was a terrible, terrible accident. David Fiser confirmed every word of it. He told investigators he had witnessed the whole thing, that he had rushed to Wilkie's side as the young man fell.
I proceeded immediately to the scene. It was on the south side of Bedford County off of Stone Mountain Road.
Lieutenant Michael Ashworth of the Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries arrived to investigate. He examined the scene. He took both statements. He found nothing to contradict the account. He ruled the death accidental. Mulligan faced minor charges, a firearms violation and a trespassing citation. David Wilkie was buried. And that, it seemed, was the end of it. It was not. A few weeks after the funeral, a life insurance claim landed on the desk of an independent investigator named Harlan Davis. The policy was for $100,000. David Wilkie, just 18 years old, had a $100,000 life insurance policy. That was unusual on its own. But what stopped Davis cold was the name listed as the sole beneficiary, not Wilkie's parents, not his fiancée, not a sibling, David Fiser. The same man who had been standing in those woods when Wilkie was shot. The same man who had vouched for Mulligan's story without hesitation. The same man who had called himself Wilkie's closest friend. Davis began asking questions. He requested an interview with Fiser. Fiser was evasive, deflective. He gave the kind of answers that do not answer anything, redirecting, minimizing, slipping out of the conversation whenever it got too close. Davis documented everything and filed his report. The insurance company sent the case to their attorney. This is usually where cases like this die, caught in the machinery of legal process, buried under the weight of paperwork and the absence of hard proof. The insurance company eventually settled out of court. Fiser received $25,000. But Harlan Davis' suspicion, every word of it had been committed to paper. And in this case, the paper trail was just getting started. A year and a half after David Wilkie's death, Special Agents Robert McDowell and James Lillard received a tip. It came from an unlikely source, an informant who went by the street name Bear. His real name was Gerald Steedham. What Steedham told agents made the room go quiet. He said that David Fiser had approached him long before the hunting trip. Fiser had laid out a plan: kill David Wilkie, collect the insurance payout, split the money. Simple, clean. Steedham had refused, but that wasn't the whole story. After Wilkie was dead, Steedham said, Fiser had come back to him with a new proposition. Bobby Mulligan, the shooter, had become a liability, a loose end who knew exactly what had happened in those woods. Fiser, according to Steedham, wanted that loose end eliminated. Agents weighed the intelligence carefully. Steedham was a street informant not without baggage, but the details he provided were too specific to dismiss. He knew things about the case that had never been made public. The FBI opened a formal investigation. For the first time in over a year, the case file on David Wilkie was growing. And the name being written across every new page was David Fisher. The mission was straightforward. Getting there was anything but. To build a case the prosecution could take into a courtroom, agents needed Fisher to confess on tape. Fisher had a background that made him dangerous to approach. He was careful, suspicious. He chose his words with precision, and he had an informant's instinct for sensing when he was being set up. Agents needed Steedham to wear a wire. Steedham was terrified. He believed, and agents privately agreed, that if Fisher ever discovered the recording equipment, Steedham would not survive it. Fisher had already allegedly ordered the death of one person close to him. He would not hesitate to order another. Eventually, after careful preparation and no small amount of convincing, Steedham agreed. The first wired meeting was tense. Fisher spoke in implications, suggestions. He circled the topic without ever landing on it cleanly. Agents reviewed the tape. It was not enough. They tried again. Then again. Fisher was smart. Every time he edged toward a direct admission, he pulled back. But in one recorded exchange, Fisher made a remark that chilled investigators about witnesses who dared to speak. Those who popped their heads above the water, he said, had a way of disappearing. It was not a confession, but it confirmed that Gerald Steedham's life was in real and immediate danger. The clock was ticking. Pause here for a moment. Because this investigation was not just a murder case. It was a race. Every day without a confession was another day Fisher walked free. Another day Steedham was exposed. Another day the FBI's only real evidence, the testimony of a paid informant, could collapse in court. They needed Fisher on tape, and they were running out of time. Then came the break investigators had not expected. While building their case, agents tracked down a woman who had been close to David Wilkie before his death. His fiancée, what she told them was devastating. Fisher had approached her, not after the shooting, before it. He had proposed that she help him collect on Wilkie's life insurance policy. He had outlined how Wilkie's death could be made to look like an accident. She had been horrified. She told no one at the time, partly from shock, partly from fear. Because she believed Fisher was dangerous, she was right. Her account did not just corroborate what Steedham had told the FBI. It revealed something more alarming. Fisher had shopped this plan to multiple people before finding someone willing to pull the trigger. This was not a crime of passion. It was not impulsive. David Wilkie had been hunted. The FBI now had two independent witnesses, both pointing to the same man, both describing the same motive. It was time to move. Agents devised what would be their final operation. Rather than wait for Fisher to slip, they would push him. Steedham would tell Fisher that the investigation was closing and that agents were asking questions, that Steedham was under pressure, that he might not be able to stay quiet much longer. The goal makes Fisher angry enough or desperate enough to talk. A staged pager message was sent through an FBI employee, engineered to make Fisher believe critical new information had surfaced. Fisher called Steedham. The conversation was recorded. It was not the clean, airtight confession agents had worked toward for years. Fisher was too controlled for that. But combined with Steedham's testimony, Wilkie's fiancée's account, the insurance records, and what Mulligan knew, it completed a picture that was impossible to look away from. On November 5, 1986, 3 years after David Wilkie was shot dead in the Virginia woods, a grand jury handed down its indictments. David Fisher and Bobby Mulligan. First-degree murder. Conspiracy to commit murder. Murder for hire. Arrests were made by FBI agents and the Charlotte Police Department Fugitive Unit. Agents searched Fisher's belongings and found additional circumstantial evidence consistent with the prosecution's case. The net had closed. It was Bobby Mulligan who finally broke the silence. Faced with the charges, the evidence the FBI had assembled, and the weight of what he had carried for 3 years, Mulligan confessed. He told agents everything. That Fisher had approached him and laid out the entire plan. That the hunting trip was not spontaneous, it was the vehicle for a murder Fisher had been engineering for months. That what happened in those woods was not an accident. Mulligan described the pressure Fisher had applied. The promises of payment, money that had been partially delivered and partially held back as leverage to keep Mulligan in line. He confirmed everything Steedham and Wilkie's fiancée had alleged. Fisher, Mulligan said, had planned it all. From the beginning, for the agents who had worked this case for years, who had navigated informants, wiretaps, and the constant threat of exposure, it was the moment the entire investigation had been building toward. The paper trail that started with one suspicious insurance claim had led, through years of patience and painstaking work, all the way to the truth. David Fisher was convicted on all 3 counts: first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, murder for hire. The jury sentenced him to death. Bobby Mulligan pleaded guilty to the same charges. He was sentenced to life in prison. For David Wilkie's family, for his mother, Diane, for the fiancé who had lived in fear for years, and finally came forward, the verdict arrived long after it should have. Fisher spent years on death row, exhausting every appeal. On March 25, 1999, 16 years after the shot that killed David Wilkie in the Virginia woods, David Lee Fisher was executed by lethal injection. Fisher had called David Wilkie his closest friend, his son in everything but name. But to David Fisher, money was worth more than friendship, worth more than loyalty, worth more than life itself. In the end, the paper trail he never expected anyone to follow brought him to the chair. Every case has a paper trail. This one led straight to his door. David Wilkie was 18 years old. He had a fiancée, a future, and a man he trusted with both. The FBI trusted the process, the files, the informants, the wires, the paper trail, and that process delivered justice. 16 years later, if this case gripped you, hit subscribe. Every week we go deeper into the files the public was never supposed to see. The case is closed, but the records, they are right here.